Welcome back to another edition of Components Breakdown. Today we're going to be looking at the 2010 Essen release game called Merkator by Uwe Rosenberg. The game is a 1 to 4 player economic simulation style game that takes about 2 hours to complete. The theme of the game revolves around the rise of Hamburg after the 30 Years' War, in which each of the players is going to represent a merchant traveling across various places of Europe, trading goods and fulfilling orders in order to have the most victory points at the end of the game. Let's go ahead and open up the game and take a look at the components inside. Now I've set up a 2-player game, and what I'm going to do is walk through all the components in a little more detail for everybody and then jump right into the gameplay. It is actually a very simple game to learn. It's very easy to teach as well. It's one of Uwe's easier games to understand, which has some benefits obviously for the time of introduction to new players, but it's also got some huge drawbacks as well, which I will discuss at the very end of this components breakdown. So let's start off with the rules. The rules are very simple to understand. There are 2 sets of rules. The main rule set is, I believe, 8 pages, front to back, gives you all the necessary information you would need to understand the game. And then there's a 1-sheet flyer that simply tells you how to set up the game. Very easy to understand, very easy to explain to newcomers. There is a time board which is set up in a specific way when the game starts. As you see, there is a numbering system on the right telling you how many players will be using it. For a 2-player game, you want to start at this line and fill it all the way to the bottom with these double-sided time markers. You can also have a longer 2-player game by filling out this line, and then a 4-player game is going to take a little bit more time to conclude. Very easy. The main game board is very nondescript, very easy to understand. You see some main squares in the center. Now this is a 2-divided board with some holes in it, as you see here. I just wanted to mention that. These are actually put together and simply fit in these areas. Now as I go back here talking about the game board, it's broken into 2 different pieces. There are 2 different kinds of regions on the game board. There's major locations and then there are minor locations. All the major locations have larger squared boxes with little symbols for the goods in them. And they're all connected by these little rope lines that you see here. There are also 4 minor locations which are not connected by rope lines, do not produce goods, and are laid on the outside of the board. Looking at each of these different areas, they each produce something a little bit different. For instance, France produces either plums or wine, which are the blue cubes. Some of the areas also have time markers on the left-hand side denoting whether or not you gain or lose time when you go to these locations. And on the minor locations, you see a little symbol in the upper right-hand corner. These designate how many additional tokens you're going to add to the other locations when you visit these locations. And the last thing in the bottom right corner is for the joining. Players can move along with you when you go to a specific area. Each of these areas is represented by a different color cube, and each of these cubes represent 2 different types of goods, and we'll get to that once we get to the main boards. There is one that's left off to the side for additional time markers. There is the Merkator cube, which is a merchant moving through these areas. Now there is only one for all the players, so all the players will be using this same additional one. There's some coinage in the game and represented by 5s, 2s, and 1s. Very thick, nice cardboard stock on these. The meat of the game is the contracts in which the players will be trying to fulfill as the game progresses. They start off with a 2, a 3, a 4, and a 5 contract, which are laid on their main board. Now all these are shuffled prior to the start of the game, and they're all different from one another. Looking at one of the specific contract cards themselves, they have an area designated at the top telling you where you need to go on the board to fulfill that specific contract. The middle section are the goods in which you have to have on your board in order to fulfill that contract. The bottom left represents what numbering system that contract is. The higher you go up, the more difficult or complex the contracts become. And then there is a coinage, which is also the same as the number here, telling you that if you wish to invest this card or sell off this contract, you would get that many coins for the sale of that contract. There are some bonus cards, which come in denominations of 3 and 4 in order to purchase them. They all again have locations on where you would get that bonus. So if you happen to go to Russia or visit Russia, you would get 2 spice. If you visit it with somebody else or join someone else's travel, you would only get 1 spice. And I've already set that up for a 2-player game. And then the last one are the building cards. And the building cards are victory points that one can gain at the end of the game for fulfilling specific actions. For instance, if you build the orphanage, which costs you 12 coin to build, you would get half a victory point per food icon that you have at the end of the game. And again, we'll go into that in a little more detail. Everything is very, very easy to understand in the game. The last of the components are the ones that the players will be starting off with. Looking at one of these player boards, again, very easy to understand. There are 4 storage areas, which are denoted by these A, B, C, and D areas with the word storage below them. And there are towers that go upwards. And each of these has a specific good in them where you would take that collared cube and put it in there. Each of these goods also has a specific type to them. So for instance, plums are a food. Livestock can either be food or clothing. And then you have weapons here for the saltpeter and the copper and the iron. Now there's also 2 depots on the end of it here, which are gray towers. Now these are the only reason why you need to know the difference between storage and depots in the game is the building cards that you'll use at the end of the game. Some will give you additional victory points for storage things that you have, and some will give you victory points for depot things that you have. Also, at the bottom of each player's board, there are 5 locations for contract cards, and they're denoted by these lines in between them. You're allowed to have as many contract cards as you want, with the exception that at the start of each of your turns, if you have 5 or more, which would overflow off your board, you have to invest those or sell those contracts to gain the coins for them. So you can actually only have 5 contracts in your area when your turn actually begins. Also, each player is given 1 scoring marker telling you how the game is scored at the end of the game, and a supply cube. And on the supply cube, every player starts off with 1 cube of each of the 8 different colors. At any time during the game, on their turn or opponent's turns, they can take these cubes and put them anywhere on the board that would represent those colors. So they can take the red cube here and either put it in the citrus fruit or the spice. Once they've used that, though, they can never refill the supply. So it's just a one-time shot for them to be able to try to fulfill a contract if they so need to. So with that, let's go ahead and start explaining a 2-player game and the basic mechanics of it. Now, I showed everyone the major components and set up a 2-player game on the last segment of the video, so we're going to run through the gameplay very quickly here. The game can end in one of 2 different ways. The first player to fulfill a level 10 contract, as you see there, would get the Peace of Westphalia card, thus designating the end of the game, in which every player, including himself, would get 1 more turn to take any actions that they could. The second way in which the game can end is if the last time marker is taken off the board by traveling to a specific location. Time markers are taken off in rows, so they start at the top and move your way down. Those are the 2 ways in which the game can end. On a player's turn, they are going to have 4 different phases of gameplay. The very first phase is called investing, in which they're allowed to take 3 different actions, or a couple different actions. The first thing they can do is they can sell or invest any of the contracts that they start off with. As you see here, they start off with a 2, 3, 4, and 5. Right from the start of the game, they can decide to sell one of these contracts if they so wish to not use it. They get that many coin simply placed on their side of the board. With those coins, they're allowed to do a couple different things. They can invest in additional bonus cards, which will give them additional goods when they travel to those locations. The costs are in the bottom left. Or they can invest in buildings, which cost quite a bit more, but give you victory points at the end of the game. The conditions, such as you see there, cost 12 and 10 coins. So it's going to take a lot of selling and investing of your contracts. When you invest, you lose that contract and you place it on the discard pile. Very simple. Now, there is a forced investment which will take place if you ever have or start your turn with 6 or more contracts, meaning that your 6th contract is off the board. You are forced to invest one of those cards or sell off one of those cards. So you can only typically have 5 cards in front of you at any given time. The second phase of the game is called travel. And here you're going to do a couple different things. The very first thing you're going to do is you're going to take this marker and travel to any one of the locations on the board. This is the Merkator marker. Say, for instance, the first player decides to travel to Hamburg. They would take any goods on that location and place it on their board. When they take a good, they can be one of two different goods. So the green can either be a livestock or a musket. When there are 2 or more cubes on a location, they have to split them evenly. When there are 3 or more, such as say there are 6 cubes on a location, which happens quite often, they just have to put 1 on one, and then the other 5 can be placed on the other location. But you have to at least have 1 on one of those specific locations. Then you're going to distribute new goods. When you travel to a major location, you distribute 1 new good to each location tied to it. So you're going to put 1 in the Dutch Republic, 1 in Sweden, and 1 in Danzig. So anytime you travel to a major, put new cubes, 1 new cube in each other major location tied to it. When you travel to a minor location, you look in the upper left-hand corner. So say you travel to Italy, and it says 1 plus there. You would have to put 1 cube in each major location that has at least 1 or more. In Newfoundland, it says 0 plus, so any location would get 1. If you travel to Bohemia, only the locations that have 3 or more cubes in it currently would get 1 additional cube. Very easy to understand. The next thing is time counters. Some locations are going to give you time counters, and some of them require that you spend time counters, and some of them don't cost time counters at all. If you travel to Hamburg, you gain 2 time counters, and you simply take them off the board, and you place them on your location. If you were wanting to travel to Spain, you have to spend them. So if you don't have the available time counters, you cannot travel to those locations. And the last thing in travel is a loss of goods check. Anytime that the last marker is taken off a row, you flip it over and you look at that location. And everybody, including the player that flipped it, would lose 1 good of their choice from that specific storage area or depot. Very easy to understand. The third phase is fulfilling contracts, and whenever you travel to a location, if you have the appropriate goods, you can fulfill that contract. So say you went to Italy and you have 1 vegetable. You can go ahead and put that vegetable from your board into the supply and gain a contract of a higher denomination. So you don't actually get coins for filling contracts, you get a higher level contract. So you would get a level 5 contract, which would be the top one, and you would place it on your board. Now, the reason for this is that you're trying to get all the way up to level 10 and fulfill level 10. At any time you're allowed to sell any of these, so if you so wish, gaining coinage for those specific contracts. Again, very easy to understand. The fourth phase is accompanying other players. You can join other people's players' travels by giving that player time markers if you have them. So another player can travel with you to Hamburg. However, they do not get any cubes that are there. They're only allowed to gain bonuses from the bottom travel part of a bonus card they have, such as 1 iron, if they so happen to have the Hamburg specific bonus card, and then they are also allowed to fulfill any contracts that they are able to fulfill, which is a very nice addition to the game, but it kind of slows down the gameplay. So that will keep happening until the last player, or the first player takes off the last time marker, or the Peace of Westphalia card is taken and a level 10 contract is acquired. Very simple game to understand, very easy to play, very intuitive, but very, very dry and very boring for me. This is my least favorite game by Yui, and I usually judge games on a couple different criteria. First, is it aesthetically pleasing to me? Second, is the game fun? And third, is it something that I want to pick up and play again? Now, I've played this game 4 times, and I tell you what, the third and fourth time were a chore to me. I wasn't having any fun. I played with 2 players, and I played with 4 players. And every time that I played it, everybody was in the same mindset that it's just so dry and so boring, and it's the same actions over and over, and no one really felt like they were in tune with the theme of the game. This is not my favorite game by any stretch of the imagination. It's not even close to my favorite Yui game. It's actually the 4th one down the list in his really decent trilogy besides The Gates of Loyang. And it just feels like it was rushed and the mechanics weren't really well thought out. Not my favorite game. That's Merkator, and take it with a grain of salt. If this is your style of Euro game, go for it. If not, I would steer clear of it.